This film, I've got my crib sheet here. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to thank the Cinematheque. I'm going to talk about Bo Harwood. I'm going to brief, all of this is brief, Peter, Jenna, and John. And then I'll close out by describing what my impressions of the film you're going to see tonight are. Now, the great lights prevent me from seeing you distinctly, but I would love to start by getting an idea of how many of you have already seen this film. That's great, because most of you haven't. And those of you who are here and can handle it are gluttons for punishment and absolutely appreciators of art. And I would like to start by thanking the Cinematheque and especially Grant Moniker for having the brilliance to understand art when they see it. And that's what this film is. This film is now 52 years old. I was in the business 2 years, year and a half before I met John Cassavetes. I had what I call Ferris luck. I'm a Scotsman and we're very superstitious. But once something has happened to you again and again and again, you begin to realize there's more to it than superstition. 3 months, I came here in 1970, and 3 months into that time, I was in the desert working with Orson Welles. A year later, a year and a half later, I was working with John Cassavetes. Two of the greatest mavericks that Hollywood has ever seen. And the reason they're called mavericks is because they did something we all appreciate as Americans. They did it their way. So, let me start by telling you about Bo Harwood. Grant Moniker invited us to speak here and the Egyptian 30 plus years ago. And I would stand here with Bo and we would riff off of each other. Bo's stories would click in my head and I'd think of something and back and forth we went. And you had to pry us out of here. You just, when it begins, the stories about John just flow. So the best way to talk about John is to talk to you about the way he handled other people. Bo was John's sound mixer and composer. But when he met John, John had heard the music that Bo composed for a movie called The Bach Train. And it was a no money, no nothing, little film, and John saw it, and he absolutely loved the music. So he called Bo up, and they got together, and he said, why don't you come and work for me? He was making a film, editing a film. He had finished shooting it, entitled Husbands. And so Bo began to work on that film. And he just started editing, had nothing to do with music. And this is how Bo and John became lifetime friends. Bo, when he began to think about what he was going to do next, John was preparing A Woman Under the Influence. And he went to Bo and he said, Bo, I want you to be the sound mixer on this film. And Bo said, what do you mean? I've never done sound in my life. I don't know what one of those machines are or how to work it. And the way John answered that was to say, now Bo, when it comes to the music, I hear a piano. And Bo, he simply said, I play a guitar, I don't play a guitar. And John, without a skip or a moment's pause, he said, we'll learn. And he meant they would learn together. And that's what they did. And you'll hear on the soundtrack the music that they came up with together. And it's simple, it's raw, and it's pure. And let's see, who's next? Oh, I wanted to mention that I am a believer in, when I speak, the 3 B's. Be bold, be brief, be gone. And I'll do my best, because it's hard when you're talking about John, to keep this to a reasonable amount of time. Peter Falk was a unique person as well. Anyone who floated in the general atmosphere around John for any length of time was kind of a special person, and they loved people. And when Peter first met John, he didn't trust him. Peter was from the traditional school of acting. He'd had a long career in films before he met John. And he just didn't understand his form of work. I mean, you got the script, your agent approved it, you talked about it, you learned the lines, you came on the set, you hit your marks, camera roll, you went home. John said, Peter, whatever you want to do, wherever you want to go, I want you to know you have that freedom. There were never marks on John Cassavetes' set. And there was never any control by John to have them in certain light and in certain places. But Peter, he just couldn't get used to it. But over time, and after Husbands, Peter became one of John's greatest fans. After we buried John in 1989, we all went back to the house, which is where many of his films, Love Streams and others, were shot. And as he walked up the door to get into the house, I'll never forget him saying, you know, I knew that son of a bitch for 25 years. I never understood a word he said. That was John's style. John knew what he wanted, and he found a way to get it. Tonight, you're going to see a performance by a lady who I was fortunate enough to get to know and be close with. And it is, in my view, if not the greatest, one of the greatest actress performances in the history of cinema. You show great perception. I can remember the moment, and it's in what we call the spaghetti sequence, when Jenna begins to talk directly to Peter, to Nick Longhetti, and Mabel starts going. When I saw that, I said to myself, how did I get here? I am observing one of the greatest performances I'll ever see. And that just carried on. It got greater and greater and greater as the film progressed. Jenna passed away last year at 94. She was a gracious, sophisticated, kind, generous person. And she loved John with all her heart. And this was a combination of pairing made by the gods, because nobody could do what they did. As you have seen this film, know, and who are among you about to experience it will understand. Finally, John Cassavetes. I met John because I had seen one of his films 13 times. It was called Minnie and Moskowitz. And it's a very approachable, very precious film. When I met Seymour Cassell riding his bike down Laurel Canyon, I yelled out, like any of you would naturally do, "Hey, Seymour!" And Seymour, being Seymour, just pulled his bike over and started a conversation. This story has become a legend in Hollywood among those who care about such things. And it's, as I like to say, it's written about in books, so it must be true. But I'm here to tell you, we talked for 5 or 10 minutes. He gave me John's number. I called John. John said, "I'd like to meet you." He hired me. I went to work on this film. John did something very unusual, not very unusual, but very smart. He had everyone work on the house that you'll see in the film tonight. That is the set. He had everybody, high, low, in between. I'm not sure that Al Rubin, his producer, worked on it, but all of us kids, and we were kids, we were just starting out. I personally was as green as grass, greener than an Irish shamrock. I knew nothing, but I had been working for a year and a half trying to develop my knowledge about camera, because I had chosen this as a place to be, because that's where the film gets made. So, John, the film started in the fall, it ended in the, not quite before the spring. We shot about 3 or 4 months, and John shot in order, in continuity, which is really a boon for actors. And as he developed characters and as they grew, they all began to understand better his style and the way he worked. Now, 1 or 2 anecdotes about John, just to give you a sense of him. I once read that he grew up in a house. You know, he was a mad Greek. And both his parents were New Yorkers who had immigrated from Greece. And you'll see them in the film tonight. Nick Cassavetes and Catherine Cassavetes. And they were New Yorkers, and John was a New Yorker who, like many of us, finds their way out here. I happen to have been born in California, but because I was a war baby, I was born in '43, and as a result of the war, I ended up in New York City and grew up there until I came out here again to begin my career in 1970. So we were working on Chinese Bookie down the street in Hollywood, on the Sunset Strip. And we had the whole set was Gazzarri's. And we had worked particularly late one night. And John said, there were maybe 10 or 15 of us, "Let's go to Musso's," which is a favorite hangout in Hollywood. We got there at about 11:15, 10 of 11. They close at 11 o'clock. And the man at the door didn't know John. And I'm not sure he would have cared if he did know him. He wanted to go home. John said, "Where's your manager? Let me have a word with him." In about 5 minutes, we all had a table for about 15 people in the back room, and we stayed there till 1, 2, or 3 in the morning, talking about the day's work. And this was a small sample of what John was capable of. John himself was one of the most special people I've ever known. He cared first and foremost about other people. He once said, "I only care about love. I only want to understand love. What makes it work, what makes it go good, what makes it fail." And that's what his films are really about. So, I am hugely privileged to be able to sit here and speak to all of you, my newfound friends, to tell you about this man. There will never be another like him. I spent a year myself in Greece, and I know how mad Greeks are. But he took the cake. And one of the other things I read was he was raised in a household where there were absolutely no rules. If you wanted to sing at the table, you sang at the table during dinner. If you wanted to dance on the table, which I happen to have witnessed several times at 3 in the morning, after we squashed all the grapes in a friend's winery, the parties in Greece just begin around 2 or 3. Anyway, he was a magnificent human being. And any of us who knew him were privileged to know him. And we have a huge responsibility to give you some sense of who he was. So, if I had more time, I would tell you more stories, but I can't go on forever. I will give you this tip. Probably many of you are familiar with the Criterion Collection. They do great DVDs, and they did a box set for John. All his major films. Among that box set is a documentary entitled A Constant Forge. It was directed by Charles Kislyak. It is as close, in my opinion, as anyone who never knew John will ever get to knowing him. But the caveat is, it's like John's film, long. All right, let me begin to sum up by saying, the film you're about to see is an extraordinary work of art by an extraordinary collaboration of people headed by one extraordinary visionary. Peter Falk used to say, John was not like normal people. He saw the sunrise 2 or 3 hours before anyone else. Some of you who haven't seen it may hate this film. You may love this film, but there's no in between. You love it or hate it, and that's John. When we premiered The Killing of a Chinese Bookie in Westwood in 1976, within the first 15 or 20 minutes, people were walking out. Within the next half hour, they were throwing boxes at the screen. And John just could not have cared less. Now, if the management will allow, I'll tell one more story about John, and then we'll be done. it is an essential story about John. It's who John was. We spent a lot of time working on the killing of the Chinese bookie. And the day comes where we actually are going to shoot the Chinese bookie. And we've worked, it's a night call, we get to work about 3 o'clock. And we're eating dinner, 3 o'clock, probably around 11, 12, maybe a little later. Time has no meaning when you're doing night work. And it's lunchtime, and there's no John. And a half hour goes by, and there's no John. So I take it on myself to go out and try to find John. I don't find John. I find Al Rubin, our producer, a very special friend of John's, and who made all the movies happen for John. I said, Al, where's John? And he said, you don't want to know. I said, wait a minute, half of me is a New Yorker. I want to know. And he said, all right, come over here. He wanted to get away from anybody who might hear us. He said, you remember the guy that he chose and he cast to be the bookie? Yes. Do you remember what he looks like? Yes. Well, and then he stops. Now I have to tell you, the scene is that Ben Gazzara has made a deal with the mob, and it's his job to knock off the Chinese bookie. And the moment has come where he has to do it. It's either the bookie or Benny's character. No choice. He looks around and he says, John doesn't want to shoot him. What do you mean? He just thinks the old man playing the part is too sweet. He can't face having him killed. To which Al, who's a tough guy, he looks at John and he says, John, the name of the movie is The Killing of the Chinese Bookie. The way it was resolved, hours later it seems, was we do a close-up of the gun coming into frame and firing. We never see the bookie. He's in the pool with a bunch of young women who are just not doing anything they shouldn't, but just taking care of him. He's like a godfather. And then you cut from that moment to Benny running as fast as he can. And that's the way it was handled. But can you imagine the director of a film? Well, that in essence is who John Cassavetes was. So with that, enjoy this film. And thank you for your patience, listening to me, and I appreciate so much the opportunity to be here with you.